Joseph, thank you so much for being here. It's truly an honor.
Been looking forward to it.
Good. It feels like we've had you on the podcast before. So much to the extent that Aubrey actually was under the impression that we had you on before.
Continuing a conversation.
I'll count that one too, the imaginary
yeah,
one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. And I am legitimately so excited about this conversation. I will confess, perhaps, I read the book cover to cover for the first time a few months ago. And my impression was, this is it. Like, this is the key to happiness, to good relationships, to leaving behind resentment, to high performance as a team. And I was like, how is this not taught in schools? Like, it is life-changing. So thank you, first of all, for the work. I mean all of that very, very sincerely.
Thank you.
It has already changed my life. I'm working in a tech startup right now, high growth, complete chaos, hiring people like crazy. And that type of environment lends itself to lots of room for lots of crucial conversations.
Absolutely.
And it has been absolutely necessary for me over the past few months. So again, just thank you. And thank you for being here. Maybe we could start. I'd be curious. I mean, there's so much that we can get into and will, but would you give us just sort of the origin story? This book's been around for a long time now. Look at me. Despite how young you look, this book has been around for a long time. So maybe give us just the background.
Yeah. So we started our careers, my partners and I, not with an interest in communication. In fact, we kind of got dragged involuntarily into this topic. Our interest was what makes a social system work. So, that might sound like more of an abstract statement, but a social system is a family. It's a neighborhood, it's a church group, it's your elders quorum, relief society, it's a company. And so any group that has a common intention is a social system. And we wondered, are there some common behavioral norms that best predict what social systems will achieve their mission? So happy marriages, happy families, children that grow up, well adapted and things like that. And so we wondered, are there kind of norms, and are they industry specific? Is tech different than heavy industry or government or nonprofit? Well, time and again, what we found was that the kind of behaviors that cause the most mischief tend to be ones that happen around issues that are emotionally or politically risky. So one of the first ways this came up was I got a phone call on a Friday afternoon from a hospital in South Carolina. And they said, had an incident last week. Apparently, a patient was wheeled into the operating room. They performed a flawless amputation of a portion of the patient's left foot. The problem was the patient was there for a tonsillectomy. That's a tough conversation with a patient when you say, wow, how did this? And so, our problem was not fixing the medical error. Our problem was figuring out, how does a social system with well-trained, well-intended people, lots of rules, lots of regulations, lots of technology, do something like this? Because it happens often. It turns out in the United States, there are about 150,000 deaths every year as a consequence of medical mistakes. And they're the same categories of mistakes that we made last year and the year before and the year before. And so as we investigated at this hospital, we found there were no fewer than 7 people who that morning could have averted that disaster if they'd done one simple thing. And you can guess what it was. It was just speak up. And so we asked, why don't you speak up? Well, the norm there was that if there's someone in a position of power that you might irritate, you don't say anything. Or if we're in a rush, you don't slow things down. Or there were norms that just said, don't do this. So that was kind of one of the first times it came to our attention. We started seeing it in the tech field, where you've got all of these interdependent teams that have to work sometimes across international boundaries to accomplish common goals. And when they get together to discuss how things are going on the project, they lie to each other. No one wants to admit they got problems, or they're behind, or they need more resources, or admit to mistakes. Again, emotionally and politically risky issues. You start looking at marriages. And the things that divide us it's not about common backgrounds and common religion and common socioeconomic. It's not about that. It's about the things that inevitably will happen that you differ on. We disagree what to do with this child. We disagree, what we're going to do with resources or money or what have you. And how we behave around those tends to disproportionately affect every relationship of our lives. So that's what forced us to attend to this issue.
I am very aware that this may be a personality thing, it may be a family culture thing, but I think I come from this place of that the right thing to do is always going to look something like niceness, you know? And so that's how I'm framing it. And I use niceness as an excuse to extend that lag time, like you talk about, to just delay conversations, and really with no intention of ever returning to it. I just kept noticing over and over that I had really values-based language around not having the conversation. I'm going to choose not to be offended, and or just not rock the boat. Like I have the longest list of ways to not ever have to have a hard conversation. So can you talk about what is happening there and what's the difference? Can you choose not to be offended, and do you still need to have a conversation? Can you choose to take total responsibility for something that's hard for you, and does that let you off the hook? Or, you know, why are there crucial conversations that need to be had if you have a value of taking responsibility and maintaining relationships and not rocking the boat for the sake of rocking the boat?
Yeah. So let me back up to where you started with that, which is tremendous self-awareness. So your consciousness that you frame this in a way that's morally favorable.
Yes.
To say, this isn't silence, this is Christianity,
exactly.
right?
Yes.
And when you overlay the religious component on that, I think it gives us all the more justification for not doing it. The problem is, as you look at the scriptures, there is no justification. So if you look at how the Savior and his 12 related to one another, it was one series of crucial conversations.
Oh, interesting.
Wow.
It was one after another after another. And they were blunt. They were honest. The beauty is, take the Savior out of it too, just them with each other. If they had beefs with each other, they were out there with it. They were accusing each other of pettiness and jealousy and social climbing and all these sorts of things. And then later on, when Paul comes on board, it's bigotry and Peter and all that kind of stuff. I love it. It's wonderful because that's what it's supposed to look like. And so it's interesting that we appropriate Christianity to justify silence when there really is no justification when you read the actual sacred writ. The entire sacred texts start with a crucial conversation in the Garden of Eden. I mean, it's right out front with the father having correction with the children that are screwing it up or whatever it is, and you can interpret that conversation any way you want, but it was emotionally and politically risky. It was a tough moment. And then it continues with the children of Israel and Noah and others all the way down through the line. And so it turns out that these moments, the moments when we have to connect with another human being about something about which we have tremendous vulnerability, those are the crucible of our souls. Literally in that moment, we learn to show up in a way that either creates atonement, that gives the possibility of connection with another human being, or creates the fissures and divides that keep us separated from each other. And we see it in today's political climate. Who cares that we have disagreements? That's not the issue. The issue is how we're showing up around those. And those are creating the divides. So we came to call these moments of disproportionate influence. That's what we were in search of when we started focusing on crucial conversations. Moments where how you show up disproportionately affects the prospects for my tech company, the prospects for my training company, the prospects for my family. And I can tell you now with adult children, if they go back at the wounds in our family and say, where did they originate? They can isolate a specific conversation. Oh, wow. They can tell me the moment dad showed up in a way that hurt, or that mom disappointed them. And it tends to be an interpersonal conflict moment. So there is no amount of attention we could give to this that would be out of proportion to what it deserves.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing. So, I mean, there's lots of hard conversations, potentially to be had in life. What makes a conversation crucial? Like, how do you define it in the work?
So there are three characteristics that set it apart. And I'll give you an illustration first. It's because they come on us, so unexpected. So it's Christmas time, the family's got some time off, and we decide we're going to go on a family outing. So we go bowling. Our kids are younger at this point, and so we're in the bowling alley. And at one point, two of my children who had some sibling rivalry growing up do that thing again. And so one gets up to bowl, and the other one says, "That's my bowling ball." And the other one looks back and goes, "No, it's not. It's mine." And she says, "No, it's not. It's mine. It's mine. It's mine. It's mine." It's back and forth. And there we are. We're off and running, right? And so in an attempt to intervene, I'm thinking, I'm a crucial conversations expert. Perhaps I can be of help in this moment. And I said, "Well, hey, son, actually it's the bowling alley's ball. and besides, last time you got up, you used my ball and it was no big deal." And he said, "No, I didn't." I said, "Yes, you did." He said, "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "No, I didn't." And then my wife's looking at me like, "Are you out of control here or something? What happened to you?" And so you get sucked into it so quickly. And so the three conditions that define them are, number one, that there's opposing opinions, that I come into this conversation expecting you to disagree with me. And that tends, and there's biological, physiological, sort of developmental reasons that this happens to us. But I gear up for conflict. The second is these are emotional moments. So there's strong emotions involved. And the final is that it's high stakes, that this is important to me. Now, in the example I just gave, it shows the subtlety of high stakes, because you'd say bowling alleys and bowling balls in a bowling alley, who cares? Well, it gets infused with more meaning for me in that moment. It's about being right. It's about ego. And so the issue often isn't the issue in these conversations, but high stakes, opposing opinions, strong emotions, those are what tend to set these apart.
Yeah. Okay, so give us like a high level, what does a healthy, crucial conversation look like? And then we'll really dive in.
Yeah, the outcome of a healthy, crucial conversation is that there's a common pool of meaning at the end, and that's it. So it isn't about outcomes.
It's not about agreeing.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
And so it's just that you feel fully understood, and that in this common pool, I have access to a full understanding of how you think and feel on whatever topic we're about, and that I do this, I do as well. Nothing held back.
Wow.
So I just had a very crucial conversation before coming here with a longtime friend, and there's some financial stress between the two of us. And I feel wonderful about that conversation, even though it's not resolved, because I know everything about how he thinks and feels on that issue, and I see I can respect it. I don't disagree with all of it. And he heard me out on all of mine, and it was not easy to let him know how he disappointed or let me down or other things like that. And so that's the goal, is a common pool of meaning. Now, the beautiful thing that happens when there is that common pool of meaning is there's often synergistic solutions that flow out of it. Because now the collision of my point of view and yours creates these other possibilities that didn't exist before. And there's more often unity. There's more often commitment to an outcome. And so it creates a higher likelihood of unified action. Doesn't guarantee it, but it's always better than the alternative.
Yeah. That's so interesting, because in the moment, if I'm having a strong emotional reaction or a lot of negative emotion, what I'm saying, what I believe in that moment is that by sharing it, it's like contagious. Like I'm just going to bring everybody down by making this part of that shared pool of meaning. Yeah. So what happens in reality when you choose to keep it back?
Mm-hmm. So you're saying if I withhold, then it'll make space for all of them. Yeah.
I'll just keep it to myself.
Yeah. So here's one of the hard truths about crucial conversations, and I'll give you a little illustration of it. I have friends that long ago were trying to do a remodel project for their parents. Mm-hmm. And it's the end of the day. They've been working a long time. Both of them are tired, ready to go home. And one of them wants to do one more cut on a table saw. And so he's pushing the wood up, but he's not doing what you ought to do with a table saw. He's not using the guard. He doesn't have goggles on, doesn't have any of that. He's just pushing this thing through. And his brother's looking at him, and he knows that rotating wheel is getting dangerously close to the thumb. And he wants to speak up, but he knows that one of the things in their family everybody is aware of is you don't correct Mikey. You don't. Because Mikey's going to blow off on you. So in an attempt to keep the peace, right? In an attempt to just let everybody feel happy and all of that, he says nothing and boom, thumb comes off.
Oh, wow.
And to this day, he thinks to himself, why did I not? Well, because he had sort of made that mistaken conclusion that the path to peace is withholding. So what we know about crucial conversations is if you don't talk them out, you act them out. And so in our attempts sometimes to keep temporary peace, what we do is we withhold information that will affect our behavior, that will affect our attitudes, that will affect the future of our relationship. And if it doesn't get talked through in a way that leads to a better outcome, it gets acted out. So for example, if you don't trust me, if you think I'm unreliable, we'd agreed that we'd do this at 10:45, and all right, when Joseph usually shows up 10 or 15 minutes late, but we're not going to talk about that. It will affect your behavior, and you'll show resentment, and you'll have attitude about it, and I'll pick that up. And then what I tend to do is tell myself stories about your response in ways that create friction in the relationship. So one of the most important pieces of advice I could offer people about crucial conversations is quit lying to yourself. Quit telling yourself that I have a choice between speaking up and not speaking up. Those are not your options. Your options are talking it out or acting it out. And if you just tell yourself that, you'll find yourself probably exercising vulnerability a little more often.
Wow. Yeah, this the idea of the pool of shared meaning is the most memorable and maybe the most helpful part of the book for me. Just imagining, a pool of some kind growing and growing and growing, it gives such a helpful heuristic for how this conversation should be going. And I think for me, one of the reasons that sometimes I hold back from contributing to the pool of shared meaning is that in the past I've contributed to it in a way that has raised somebody else's defenses and has not been helpful. So could you talk about some of the ways that we can contribute to the pool that are helpful and that keep the conversation flowing?
Yeah, I can. And let me first address something you just said.
Yeah.
So you talked about sharing in ways that have raised other people's defenses. It's important to disconnect that causal language. You don't make others defensive. If they get defensive, there's some emotional stuff going on with them that they need to learn to be responsible for. Now, it is appropriate to ask, can I do it in a way that reduces the likelihood that they're going to tell themselves an unhelpful story about what's going on? That's an absolutely appropriate thing to do.
That makes more sense, yeah.
But I think the right way to live for us around crucial conversations is to say, I care about other people's emotions, but I'm not responsible for them. And so walking that line of, I'm going to do everything I can to make it as easy to consume as possible for you. But at the end of the day, you're going to do what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And so there are a whole host of things we could talk about. I'll give just example of a couple. And I hope these examples illustrate that our tendency is to do it exactly the wrong way. I mean, we could not choose to screw it up anymore. So let's say, for example, you and I have an ongoing relationship at work. And you've noticed over the past few months as we've worked together that I come about 10 or 15 minutes late to every meeting you set up. And while I'm in the meeting, I tend to be looking at my phone. And when you're talking, I don't make eye contact with you. And when you make calls ahead of the meeting asking for some help, I don't respond for 2 or 3 days. So these are the things that have been happening. And so you're starting to develop some judgments. You're starting to develop some feelings about Joseph. So the question becomes, how would I raise those? The way we tend to do it is we have some experiences. Joseph has behaved in certain ways. We create some judgments and feelings about those experiences, and then we forget the experiences. We just carry the emotions and judgments. And so the way you're going to start the conversation is with the information you've got access to. You're going to say, Joseph, it's just tough to work with you. This is the worst place to start.
Yeah.
It may be true, but if you're trying to help me understand and put meaning in a pool that's going to be informative to me, this is the worst place to start. And then I'll say, well, what do you mean by that? And you'll say, well, you're just unreliable. And you're pretty disrespectful too. So where we tend to start is with our judgments and our conclusions rather than with the concrete experiences that we had that created those.
Yeah.
And here's what's beautiful about this. I'm not asking you to baby me. All I'm asking you to do is give me the benefit of the same experience you've had.
Yeah.
So you had concrete experiences, then you created judgments about those, and those created some feelings about Joseph. Just give me that. Give it in that order to me. Give me the concrete experiences. Tell me the judgments that you concluded, and then how you're feeling about it. And then I'm going to be able to look at that and go, wow, yeah, I could see why you'd feel that way. Still think you're an idiot, but I can see, that's my stuff starting to go on.
Yeah.
But that's the right order to do it with.
Yeah.
You strip out the judgments, you strip out and this isn't a way of compromising the truth. This isn't about pussyfooting around an issue. This is just about communicating with me in the way you experienced it, and that helps me understand why a reasonable, rational, decent person might feel this way.
Yeah. So it's like, Joseph, last Wednesday, you walked into the meeting 10 minutes late. You weren't prepared. You were looking at or maybe that's not even a good one. Maybe something more concrete might be, I noticed that you were looking at your phone during that meeting after you came late. When I saw that, it made me feel like this. Is that sort of the...
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would caution you about the made me feel, because again, that's the emotional responsibility language.
Yeah.
Here's how I felt.
I felt like this. Yeah.
And in fact, one of the best things, my wife does this with me, and it's just so disarming for me. It's true, and it's disarming. When she wants to share an emotion, she'll generally say, this may be my stuff,
Yeah.
and I'm not blaming you for it, but here's how I felt about that.
Yeah.
And that gives me a chance to think, wow, number one, am I responsible for showing up in a different way to be helpful to you? And number two, what was my intention there? Was that selfish of me? But it gives me a little space in which to do that.
Yeah, that's really good. There's an acronym in the book, is there not? The
STATE.
STATE. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. Let's hope I can get this right. So,
okay, yeah.
STATE. So yeah. So the right order to do things is number one, to share the facts.
Share the facts.
Right. And then tell your story. And we can talk a little bit more about that. So all of us don't just have experiences. None of how you feel is a function of how I behave. So if I call you an idiot, right, you don't feel something because I called you an idiot. I called you an idiot is just a concrete experience you had, but you have to make a judgment about that. You have to tell yourself a story. You have to assign some meaning from that. And so if you're an insecure person, you might say, wow, I'm not well liked, or I'm threatened here right now. So you tell yourself a story. So step one is give me the experience you had, then let me know the judgments and the conclusions that you drew from that. And then the third step is just to ask. So it's just to open the dialogue. So here's what happened to me. Here's what I told myself about it. Do you see that any differently?
Yeah.
And now we're off and running.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the last two are more attitudinal. So those aren't how you structure what you share. But the first is to talk tentatively. So one of the reasons we have such a difficult time with politics today is because nobody talks tentatively anymore. We all want to share things as absolute, as though we just came down from the mount with tablets. And people think when I try to teach them about talking tentatively that it means understating your level of confidence. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, rather than saying the fact is, or as God and I know, instead of saying that, say I think, or I believe, or I've concluded, or I'm convinced that. Go ahead and share your level of conviction, but put I in it.
Yeah.
Putting I in it owns the fact that this is just sort of my place to be.
Well, and it seems like that's what your wife is doing in that example too. It's like, this might be
Exactly
my stuff, but that's
Yeah.
tentative.
It's important to me, and here's where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
And so talking tentatively just means that there's room for additional meaning.
Yeah.
There's maybe only that much room, but there's room. And then the final is to encourage testing. So if you tell me if I'm going too long, you're going to give me honest
No,
feedback here,
so
right?
good.
No, this is
All
exactly what we need.
because this is a crucial conversation too. And so I had this really fun experience years ago. I was in London, and I was going to give a speech early in the morning, and my plane didn't get in until 2:00 in the morning. And so I was exhausted. I get into a black taxi. We're headed downtown. And I noticed the taxi driver keeps looking back at me. And I just wanted to rest. But finally he said, "Are you an American?"
No.
And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Your president is a murderer."
Oh.
And I thought, whoa. And I said, "Yeah, not looking for a big tip tonight, are you?" And tried to make a little light of it. And then he started to rant. And he went on and on and on. And he didn't know where I stood on any of the foreign policy issues he was attacking, but he went on and on and on about this for a while. And after a bit, I thought, you know what? I'm giving a talk on crucial conversations tomorrow. I ought to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And so I said, "Sir, let me interrupt you for a second." I said, we've got about 20 more minutes until we get to my hotel. And I said, "I want to have this conversation, but here's the rules that I'm open to." I said, "You get 5 minutes to say anything you want to say, and I'm going to listen carefully to you. I want to understand your point of view, but you then have to shut up and listen to me for 5 minutes." And he looked at me with a smirk, and he said, "You've got a deal. You're a strange man, but you've got a deal." And so he did. He did his 5 minutes. And you know what? I was persuaded by some things he said, and I got my 5 minutes. And I don't know that any of us became one another's, bosom buddy at the end, but there was a wonderful conversation.
Wow.
Here's what I've learned about a crucial conversation, and this is the E in state, that you can advocate as strongly as you want for your point of view, only to the degree to which you're willing to encourage others to challenge it.
Oh, wow.
So if I'm willing to go over and above to say, you know what, at the end of this, Tim, if you see this strategy position for our company completely differently, I want to hear it, but I'm going to let you know exactly where I stand on that same question. So who do you want to have go first? And so we can talk about a whole lot more as long as we come into this curious and open, and we're willing to accept additional meaning on the topic.
And so the testing in the encouraged testing is being open to feedback on your ideas.
Attacking, critiquing any different information that you've got.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. Awesome. So again, share your facts, tell the story, ask. That engages this. The attitudinal are talk tentatively and encourage testing.
Thank you.
Okay, talk about creating safety, because that's something that comes up a little bit in the book. And I'm wondering how you navigate, take your responsibility for the way someone is receiving what you're saying and just creating a general sense of safety in the conversation. Because it does feel like that is the quickest way for everybody's walls to go up. And it's certainly the quickest way to feel dysregulated yourself. Yeah,
the first thing I want to say about safety is that it was a revolutionary finding. So we would go into these organizations. Our research started back in the 1980s. And so, heavy industry at its worst. It's, we'd go into these factories that had these blast furnaces and noise and, and it was a macho environment where aggression was the rule and things like that. And so we go into these places and we're asking about crucial conversations. And, they're going to beat me up and take my lunch money if I ask any more questions like this. And people would say, well, you just can't speak your mind to the boss, and you can't speak up the chain of command, and if you tell them bad news, they're going to fire you, and on and on and on and on. But over time, we started realizing that wasn't universally true. And we'd start in every organization asking, but is there somebody here that can speak up? Is there somebody here that does? And there was almost always that one person who could say anything that needed to be said to the bosses, the chain of command, the execs, the people on the carpeted floors or what have you. And then we started watching them. We spent literally thousands of hours in observation figuring out, why does that person get away with it? Is it they're married to the boss's daughter or something like that? Or is there something else going on here? And it turned out that they would do something at the beginning of a crucial conversation that most everybody else just glossed over. And that was they created psychological safety. They would start this with a show of respect, with a clarification of their motives. So people feel safe with you when they believe two things. The first is when they believe that you care about their problems, interests, or concerns. So think about it. If you and I had some agonizing pain in our abdomen, we would go to a surgeon today and allow them to put us down on a table, prostrate, right, and cut us open. We would let them inflict pain on us. Why? Because we believe they have our best interests at heart. So when you feel safe with people, you're willing to have uncomfortable conversations. They can say things that might be hurtful to hear. The second condition is they have to believe not just that you care about their problems, interests, or concerns, they have to believe that you care about and respect them. So when I feel that you see me as a human being and you care about and respect me, I'm willing to be open. Now, this doesn't mean it might not be a difficult conversation, that it might not be uncomfortable at times. But your job in a crucial conversation is to do two things. It's number one, to tell your truth, to tell the truth the way you see it, unapologetically. Don't sugarcoat it. And secondly, to maintain safety as well as you can, to ensure that if it looks like I've forgotten that you care about my problems, interests, or concerns, or that you respect me, that you set aside the topic for a moment and fix that. Help me understand those things. And then go back to honestly sharing your concern. I think you lied to me the other day. And here's the reason I believe that you lied to me. And so that for us was absolutely revolutionary. Because what we found is people never get defensive with you because of what you're saying. Wow. They never get defensive with you because the thing you're saying is too hard to hear. We get asked all the time, well, what about power differentials? What about situations where that person has so much more power than you that you can't really speak the truth? Well, the problem is that psychologically, we're all peers in conversations. There is no power hierarchy in a crucial conversation around psychological conditions. People with a ton of power feel just as threatened emotionally as you and I do with the podunky power. And as soon as you realize that, you're liberated. Your job is to make sure you've created that condition as well as you can for them as well. And then people up the chain of command will be more capable of listening. That's what these people we studied did.
Wow. That's so wildly interesting. Okay, what is happening in it? I feel like this is such a normal scenario where a crucial conversation is about to happen, and basically both of those things, the opposite of both of those things happen. Where somebody feels like they have to provide overwhelming evidence, and so they're sort of speaking in absolutes and like things that maybe they don't even believe, but it feels like somehow this is going to make the point seem more powerful.
This happened recently, didn't it? It looks real for you, Aubrey.
Like I hear
Tell
what
us
you're saying.
specifically
Like,
who you're talking about.
Yeah. Is he in the room?
Yeah, exactly.
It's so interesting. It feels the opposite of what might be a reflex. You know, when there is some insecurity around psychological safety, isn't it interesting that the reflex might be to stop telling yourself the truth in a way that is actually making it even less safe. Yeah. So what's happening in that scenario, and is that something that you see?
Oh yeah, it's completely the case. So the problem is that our threat systems, the systems that are designed to keep us alive as human beings, are very well adapted to physical threats, and they're very poorly adapted to interpersonal threats. But we've only got one system, and so it gets used for both. And that system really isn't good at rational conversation. It's not good at interpersonal problem solving. And so what it knows is how to get a big stick and hit you with it. And that might be a verbal stick. And so the only way I know how to construct a statement is overstatement and aggression and a loud voice and all the things that are just absolutely wrong interpersonally. And to the degree we can start, one of the skills we teach in the book is learn to look. Becoming more conscious of our own style under stress, my tendency to move this direction. If I can be alert to that, there's some wonderful cognitive interventions we can use to back myself down, to reassure myself, to create safety for me, to realize that I'm okay here. And so what I can do is pull out the tools that actually work in this context.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think I remember from the book in that particular situation is asking yourself the question, what do I really want?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And there's magic in that because it's an abstract question. So if you think about it, if physiologically my heart's racing, my blood is pumping, my larger limbs are being starved for blood because all of it's being concentrated here, my brain's being starved for blood, so it's not functioning particularly well, all of that's happening. And that's why in the bowling alley, I could say, well, it's my ball, and I'm making progress here. I'm making some really good points because that's the level of rationality I've got. So the question becomes, if I'm physiologically aroused, how do I start to downshift that? How do I do that? And one of the most powerful ways to do that is to present your brain with abstract questions that it's too stupid to answer right now.
Wow.
Because what that does when I say, what do I really want here? The word really, really means long term. It means stretching out the goal window. Because under conditions of threat, all I care about is now and me. And so in a crucial conversation, I need to be thinking about the future and you and all of us. And so what do I really want? The wonderful thing that happens if I repeatedly ask that to myself is we start thinking about longer term goals. And then they start to be what animates me, what motivates me, and my body starts to slow down. And then I can start to humanize you again. And so, yes, it's a potent intervention to get my motives back to solving a problem, building a relationship, which are the two goals of a crucial conversation.
Yeah. And so are you saying that it's not just bringing your actual goals to the forefront, but it's actually sort of activating another part of your neurology?
Exactly. That's exactly what happens.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And we've seen it time and time again. So, one of the experiences I had is we're writing this book and studying this. I'm living my life. And, I had lots of these conversations. And I was at one point in Bangladesh, and I'd finished a week's worth of work, was trying to get home. And it was a pretty chaotic airport scene. And I got to the airport 2 hours in advance, but something was broken on the computer. There were long lines out the doors, and I start panicking because I want to go home.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting in the line, and just to distract myself from my anxiety, I started this little time and motion study. Every 10 minutes, how many people move up in the line, and how many is that divided by this, and so I'm doing this little exercise when this woman comes in and cuts her way in line in front of us. Oh. And I'm thinking, that's one more. This screws up my count here. And not only that, but she had all this jumbled stuff. And so I'm about to step out of line to say, hey, you need to go to the back of the line, when the guy she cuts in line in front of explodes. He says, you get out of line. And she turns and looks at him and said, no, I won't. And he said, you get out of line right now. And she said, no, I'm not. She said, I've got to get to my flight. He says, I've got to get to my flight. She said, come on, I'm only one person. I got to get to San Francisco. This is the last flight until Friday. Please, just give me a break. He said, you give me a break. You go to the back of the line. So it's escalating. And finally, he gets out of the line. He starts pushing her luggage cart out. She gets to the other side and starts pushing it back in. And he's pushing, she's pushing, it's escalating. Finally, he lets it slide by, moves his leg out of the way. She starts to lose her balance. He doubles up his fist and he starts to swing it to hit her.
Whoa.
So, this is happening. And I'm in the middle of my time and motion study. But I'm looking at this and I thought, perhaps I can be of help.
Oh my gosh.
And so I leapt forward because he's got his fist up in the air, and I stood between him and her. And I had the element of surprise, and so he's at first startled, but I'm not particularly physically intimidating, and so he sized me up and doubled up his fists and starts to step in on me. And so, this is a crucial conversation, right? And the question becomes, what would you say first? What do you do? And in that moment, it's easy for us to dumb down our motives, to make it about defense. And that's what's happening to him. He just wanted to get to his flight. But now it's about saving face and ego and about attack and punishing, and all sorts of other motives get mixed in. And the challenge is helping him to start see longer term. But the best strategy at that point is not for you to confront the problem. It's to create safety. So the first thing I said to him was, that was unfair for her to cut in line in front of you. And he got this confused look on his face. And I said, you've been standing in line here for over an hour. So have I. I've been standing right behind you. And she just cut in line in front of you. And he starts to relax. And I said, I can get someone from the airport over here. We can figure this out. We can solve the problem. Now, what am I doing? What I'm not doing is absolving him of responsibility. But what I am going to do is make sure there's psychological safety before I hold him accountable. You got to make sure you're managing both. And so I said this to him, and he starts to relax a little bit, and he shakes his head and he says, I'm sorry. He said, I lost it. He said, and then tried to look past me to the woman who was really traumatized by this. And he said, I apologize, man. This is not me. He said, it's been an awful week. I've got to get home. Please forgive me. And think of how differently that would have gone in a different situation. in these moments when we get aroused, our brain isn't functioning, our goals become short term, and helping somebody think about what they really want, what's my real goal here, requires them being able to take a breath and get back to a safer space. We can do it for ourselves, and we can do it for others as well.
And does that ever look like pausing the conversation? I mean, in this situation, it was like, this is an emergency. You have to deal with this right now. But in conversations with a coworker or at home, do you feel like it's useful sometimes to pause and get regulated before you jump into the conversation when that's possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
There's a pace to emotion, and anger has a fast pace. And so slowing down a conversation can help the other person to feel a little bit more of a sense of safety. So it can be useful.
What about... So one more. What about, I don't think this ever comes up in the book, but what about conversations that are not happening face to face? Because I can see, like, if this is extremely high stakes, extremely high emotion, is there ever do you feel like that is still useful in creating this shared pool of meaning if people are communicating so slowly that it's literally, by email or on the phone, or like something where there's just a little bit more space to slow down what's happening in your body?
There is. And we've become, I think, we're colluding with technology today to destroy our relationships. And we tend to use technology not in an optimum way. We tend to use it as a way of avoiding vulnerability frequently. And so when you're texting back and forth about something, when there's more emotional content going on, it's really the wrong medium. But if there are times when it has to be done in that way, always write the text or always write the email twice. The first time you write it is for content. The first time you write it is just to say, what do I want to express? And that's cool. Get it out there. The second time you write it for safety. And you're going to write it as though you're reading it on their behalf and asking yourself, what would they be taking from this? What story are they telling themselves at each point? And if it's not the right story, how can I add some additional information there to ensure they're hearing it the right way? So it's possible to get there. It's still risky, but you got to do it twice.
Yeah.
So would you encourage trying to have the conversation person to person if possible?
Whenever there's emotion involved, unless you can read the body language. And even if you can, even if I deliver and package the message in a perfect way, if they can't see my face, then they're not going to trust they're going to dismiss all of the safety parts, and they're still going to imagine all of the threats that are not in there. All you have to do to make people feel unsafe in a crucial conversation is nothing. If you do nothing, the fact that it's high stakes, strong emotion, opposing opinion, they already feel unsafe. That's the default condition.
Yeah.
Wow. What about the idea of not letting the sun go down upon your anger? Or the way we say it today is don't go to bed angry.
Yeah.
I think for couples especially, this is tricky because, like, I don't know, 9 p.m. is sort of like the time maybe the kids have gone to bed, and like you're like sort of primed to like finally have a discussion about something. It can get crucial really quickly.
Yeah.
But also you're not maybe in the best state of mind. A long, tiring day, you're sleepy already. Like, I don't know. Does this come up, and do you have recommendations on this particular situation?
My problem with that advice is it leaves too much room for abuse. And so I can say, don't let the sun go down on it, which just means if I'm interpersonally more confident than you are, I'm going to demand that we resolve this right now.
Whoa.
And so I think pauses are fine, as you suggested earlier, as long as it's not a withdrawal. So it always ought to be a respectful bookmark. And there's a difference between withdrawal and a bookmark. Yeah. Withdrawal is I punish you with silence, or I feel stronger if I pull away, or anyway, there are manipulative agendas sometimes in that. Instead, I'm just saying this isn't going to work for me right now, and I do want to resolve it, and I do want to give it the attention and the emotional awareness that it deserves. Can we talk tomorrow? That's a different way of ending it than just saying, all right, the sun's going down, we got to finish this sucker now.
Yeah. What about the general idea of, do you call it lag time in the book? Why is it so important to decrease lag time? I mean, not dogmatically, like you just made the point, but like to the extent possible to not let things go on and on before you have a conversation.
This for me is one of the most important findings in the whole in 35 years, is that you can tell the health of a social system by measuring lag time. You can tell the health of a marriage, you can tell the health of a church, of a ward, or of an entire nation by how much lag time there is between when people have a concern and when they create a healthy conversation around it. And that's it. Because it's within that lag time that all of the stories get generated, all of the resentments, all of the tribalizing, all of the other sorts of dysfunctional things that happen. It's all in the absence of conversation. And so we tell business leaders, if you want a healthy organization, there aren't 15 different attributes of your culture that you ought to attend to. There's one. And that one drives everything else. it drives trust, it drives engagement, it drives all of the things that you care about. And that is shrink the lag time. Because if you're in a hospital, for example, and you can create a climate where when interpersonal concerns, technical problems, mistakes, where the shortest time possible they're corrected, then people grow, they progress, relationships are healed. But if you don't, you're going to pay the consequences of it. If they aren't talking it out there, acting it out.
Yeah. What does this look like in a ward? Because I think it's a little bit of a different context, because probably what's in your mind is that it's not mine to do. Like maybe I have feelings about this, but this is outside of my stewardship. It's not my calling. I'm just here and noticing, and I have feelings about this thing. How can this be part of a healthy ward community and not just one more thing for a leader to have to deal with?
Yeah, I'll just say at the outset that we stink at this as a church.
Yeah.
And we've had so many wonderful examples over the Pulpit and General Conference where people will get a privileged view into what happens with the Quorum of the 12, and the description is always there's strong minds and disagreements, and they have vigorous discussions, and that ought to be the way it looks. And so I will give people an out that are listening to this. The only time you have a responsibility to hold the crucial conversation is if you're a member of the family of Elohim. So if it's an issue with another member of the family of Elohim, that's the only time when you have an obligation. Take notes on this one. And if you see it, if you feel it, you've got some responsibility to deal with this. And I'll give you sort of the extreme case of this. This was 25 years ago in a ward I was in. A woman in our ward attempted suicide. And I wasn't in a leadership position in the priesthood executive committee or anything like that at the time. But I was asking around about it, and I said, who are their home teachers, visiting teachers? Who are their ministers? And I tried to talk to them. Have you talked to them about it? Is everything okay? And no, I wouldn't talk to them about it. I don't want to invade their privacy like this. And we're giving them some respectful distance. That's BS. It's absolute BS. But I hadn't talked to them either. And I had a relationship, at least a casual friendship, with the husband. And so after probably 3 months, shame on me, I called him. And I said, hey, Bob, and then I thought, well, how do you open this up? And I said, your wife tried to kill herself. What else do you say, right? How are you? How are you? Long silence on the other end of the phone. And then I hear a sob. Nobody else had talked to him about this. Because when we're uncomfortable, we justify our withdrawal. Yeah. And we ended up going to lunch and having this wonderful conversation where he had a chance to pour his heart out and cry. And I couldn't fix anything for him. But when somebody isn't getting their assignments done, when they're not doing their primary teaching, or when somebody's not ministering particularly well, we don't deal with this. And there is absolutely no justification in the scriptures for that. The Doctrine and Covenants, the first 40, 50 sections of the Doctrine and Covenants are the Savior telling Joseph Smith he's a screw-up. There isn't one positive thing said about him in the first 40 sections. Apparently, it's okay to talk about problems because he published it in there. I think Joseph included it for a reason, to say we ought to be able to talk about disappointments and problems. Again, go back to the New Testament. In the Gospels, that's all this is a whole bunch of people who are incredibly imperfect, who are confronting problems with each other all the time, and it's glorious. Mm-hmm. And the Savior was okay for it. He never once said, hey, knock it off, you guys. What he says is, if your brother has aught against you, it's your responsibility to go talk to him first. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. If your brother has an issue with you, you go talk to him. And so that's what we're supposed to be doing.
I want to ask about one other particular type of crucial conversation that I think is near and dear to both of our hearts probably, and that's between family members, some of whom have remained in the church and some of whom have left. I think a very common situation is that maybe parents have remained and children have left. And I've seen this, play out many times where there's mostly not a conversation happening between those two parties. And I think, there could be a lot of reasons, and we could speculate. I think, a lot of times the party who has left might feel judged or potentially attacked if they bring it up. The party who has remained might be, it might have implications for how they feel about themselves as a parent. They might be scared of what the other party is going to say. And so there are lots of different reasons that this is a very, very tough conversation. Yeah. Do you have recommendations for people that find themselves in that situation, maybe not estranged, but like this is a conversation that we have not yet had over this particular issue?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely do. And, so much of it, I think, for us that are still connected to the church, so much of our ego and our ambitions and our agenda for other people can show up in those conversations. And that's okay. I mean, you're human too. You get to have that stuff. But what's important is for you to recognize that part of the purpose of the conversation is for you to be able to recognize and own that too. Because that isn't the Christian part of you. That's the ego stuff. The Christian part of you ought to be the same in that conversation as our Heavenly Father is, because if that person is still a praying person, they're talking to Heavenly Father, and apparently He can manage it okay. He's dealing with this okay. And in fact, He's dealing with that with me and everybody else who's talking to Him every night, who is a hypocrite at some level anyway. And so if He can, that ought to be our model. How do I get my stuff out of the way? How do I create safety and space so I can just understand your experience? Take me by the hand and help me understand how you got to where you are. So I have a member of my ward who just announced he wanted his records taken off the church. And you've had, I know, on this program before, Dan Peterson come, a dear friend, and he said something years ago that stayed with me forever, and it has become the code of the road for me. He says, one of the fastest ways to get Mormons to scatter is to express doubt. We're threatened by that, and we ought not be. And so what we ought to be doing when somebody's expressing doubt is seeing that as an invitation to understand, to just say, tell me about your journey, what's going on. And you will never get a faster path to intimacy than having that kind of a conversation. When I said to this guy, your wife tried to kill herself, that was hot wiring intimacy. When he opened it up and let me come into that experience with him, we created a tighter, closer relationship because of that difficult conversation than we could have any other way. So when this person announced this to me, that was a signal that his elders quorum president ought to be getting a hold of this guy and saying, time for lunch. And didn't change a thing for him, but that wasn't the goal. What did change was we now have a trust in a relationship that he knows that my friendship transcends whatever's happening in the church right now. And that, as I understand it, is what Heavenly Father expects of us.
I like that example because because I think something people probably relate to a lot is that maybe you go into the crucial conversation with this hope that you're going to expand this pool of meaning, but maybe also you hope that something that you say, like everybody's hoping to negotiate an outcome still, right? And and ideally you're on the same page at the end. But so I think it's easy for there to be this sort of like weird left turn where suddenly you get a little manipulative because your motive changes. And what you're really hoping for is that you're going to ask for, to hear about their doubt with this intention that like, you're going to actually resolve it for them right now. And it's like, you can feel the energy shift in a conversation. And so, but the thing is, it's crucial because you care so much, it's always if you care, then it's a crucial conversation. So what are you thinking in your mind? Like when you feel, do you ever feel yourself going there and you start wanting to shift the intention to persuade someone and it stops being about telling the truth and more about like, what can I say that will bring you over to what I believe? That's
beautiful. And what you're asking me to do is, in a public forum here, admit that I'm imperfect. Is that what you're asking me to do? Because, okay, you dragged it out of me. And, in these conversations around changes in religious perspective and commitment, I think one of the first conversations that's really useful to have is, you know what, I want to be able to talk about this with you. And I know something's going to creep back into me. It's going to happen as we talk.
I love that.
And putting that on the table, but letting them know too, and stuff's going to creep in with you probably too, some resentment, some antagonism or whatever else, and can it be okay with us to check ourselves and to acknowledge when that's happening? Or if you see it in me, call me on it. We call this having a process conversation. So sometimes you set the content aside, which is where are you at with your faith perspective right now? And what you do is talk about how we talk, because I know this is going to be difficult for us. And that can generate a lot of trust.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. And maybe like the step before, when you're jumping into these high stakes conversations and it's not the norm, it feels like, man, if you've both read the book, it's like being on a moving sidewalk. You just move so quickly because you have this shared language and a shared intention that you don't have to establish. But when you're in a context where that's not the case and it feels like you're doing something really risky, give us some entry points, like give us some one-liners. How do you start this thing that feels like jumping off a cliff?
I think the best way universally to start a conversation is, number one, to start with heart, to be clear on your own intentions, get yourself in the right place. And then number two, to announce them. to be able to transparently announce it.
Yeah.
And so, going back to the example of my friend, my neighbor who's outside the church, being able to start the conversation to say, I've thought long and hard and tried to get myself in the right place. I love you. We have a friendship. I don't want to lose that. And my worry is that with you defining yourself in a different place, you're going to start telling yourself stories about that relationship really was just about some artificial connection. And it isn't for me. And I want that to be that way. And so that's the purpose of this conversation for me today. If you are clear on it, centered in a good place, and declare it up front, that's the foundation of safety.
What if you feel like you're doing a fairly good job having these crucial conversations? You're following all the guidelines, and like the situation where you and I are colleagues again, and you've shown up late and you don't seem to respect.
Why do you keep bringing that up?
This is getting very personal.
Get over it, man.
Yeah. Let's say that I feel like I've had this conversation with you many times. I'm somewhat outcome oriented with it. Like I'd like that to change, and I don't see any change.
Oh man.
What do you do there?
Yeah, it's a very insightful question, and one of, to me, the most portable skills in the entire book is what we call CPR. And so there are two signs that you're having the wrong conversation. The first is if your emotions are escalating. So if you come in this bugged at Joseph, but later in the conversation you're this bugged, that means something else is going on. And you're not talking about it. The second is if you ever have the same conversation twice, you're having the wrong conversation.
Oh, wow.
And so the problem is not me. The problem is you. The problem is that you're doing the same thing over and rather than escalating the conversation. So there are three levels of conversations you need to have. There's the content issue. So there's these patterns in Joseph that you've noticed, and I come up late for your meetings, don't return calls, yada yada. And you talk about that. That's the content issue. Pattern issues are when the issue recurs. So we've had this conversation before, Joseph. You made some commitments and you didn't keep those commitments. That's a different conversation. And if you're not aware that it's a different conversation, I'll be able to trick you into going back to content. What I'll do is I'll be able to explain why I was late for the last meeting. And I'm sorry because it was my daughter's dance rehearsal and there was bad traffic coming in. And if you don't realize that I just changed the topic from pattern back to content, you're going to let me get away with it. You're going to walk away feeling kind of unresolved and and then we're going to have the same conversation again. Yeah. And so the right thing to do is to say, I get it. Some extenuating things happen. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about yesterday. I'm talking about that we've talked about this before. And the final one is a relationship conversation. This is where it's no longer about just a pattern of concerns. It's about trust. It's about competence. It's about respect. So with you, it might be a trust issue or it could be a respect issue. And it's important for you to recognize when you have a relationship conversation, sometimes that will redefine the terms of the relationship. So if, for example, I continue to make improvement commitments to you as my boss and I continue to violate them, at some point we may not have a relationship anymore. It's that this doesn't work for me. Yeah. I'm not willing to have to constantly correct, and so this may lead to termination with you. And so recognizing when it's time to escalate is important.
Wow,
so good.
Yeah,
wow.
And I know we need to wrap up, but the other very especially hard conversation I think is anytime it's really rooted in values or morals, and there's not a lot of humility there because it feels like a matter of right and wrong to both people. And so I think my fear in those conversations is that what will happen is we clarify that we are at an impasse. We get so clear that we're like, yeah, this is just a genuine moral disagreement. And then what? And then it feels like, then is the problem. Did we just make the problem bigger? You know, that's what my fear says. So what happens in those conversations when you really purify the issue and it turns out that you're just in deeply different places? Yeah.
I think it's important to be self-aware enough that you recognize that there are usually an array of values you're trying to achieve in the conversation. And that if you get stuck on one that's not being achieved, you might miss an opportunity to achieve others. I once watched a horrific argument happen between two toy makers. They ran a large toy company, and you think, they ought to be loving each other all the time. But they were at it with each other because they'd been partners for 30 years, and one of them was all about creating educational toys and developing children's minds, and the other one was about we got to make margin, we got to make money, and we got to build a company. And it came up and up and up, and anyway, it finally came to this impasse where there was spittle coming across the table, and they were about to terminate the relationship. When they took a little break, and both of them were asked to consider this question, what do I really want? What do I really want? One of them came back with tears in his eyes and said, you know what? I want to make educational toys. I do want to. I want to develop children's minds. But he says, as I thought for the last 10 minutes, what I realized was even more important than that is I want to make toys with you. He said, that to me is the higher value here. And so sometimes we move up a level of abstraction and we'll start discovering there are other common values, and we can put the debate between us into a context that gives it perspective because of that. Other times, maybe the higher value is I want to retain the relationship, which means we shouldn't work together. And so we've got different agendas. That's okay. I love you. Go make money. I'm going to make educational toys. And let's find a civil way of doing this because there's a higher order value, which is civility and respect, and me not trying to force you into doing what I want you to do. That's okay too. And that can be a positive outcome.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Joseph, thank you so much. This is, I mean, like I said at the beginning, this is truly like life-changing stuff. And trying to apply it, it is difficult. It's work. But the fact that you've created, I mean, and the book and so much content around just creating a guidebook for people to start to have these conversations, it's actually changing lives. And it has for mine. So thank you for all the work, and thank you for being here to talk about it.
Delighted to hear that. And for me, it has been the crucible of my soul. And to my dying day, I'll keep working at it.
Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for listening, and a huge thanks to Joseph for coming on. You can, of course, find his books wherever books are sold and learn more about The Other Side Academy at theothersideacademy.com. And if Faith Matters content is resonating with you, we would love for you to leave us a review. You can do that on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. We love reading reviews, and they definitely help get the word out about Faith Matters. Thanks so much, as always, for listening. And as always, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.